It was a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind where time seems to move slower than usual. The streets outside Joe's diner were dimly lit, with only a few cars passing by every now and then. Inside, the diner buzzed softly with the hum of conversation and the clinking of plates being cleared away. This wasn't some fancy restaurant or trendy cafe. It was a simple place, the kind that felt like home to anyone who walked through its doors. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the aroma of sizzling bacon and warm apple pie, creating an atmosphere that made people want to linger just a little longer. The late-night crowd at Joe's was small but steady. Most of them were regulars, truck drivers stopping in for a quick cup of coffee before hitting the road again, locals unwinding after a long day at work, and the occasional tourist trying to find a bite to eat in this sleepy corner of Los Angeles. It wasn't the sort of place you'd expect to run into someone famous, but tonight, unbeknownst to everyone else, a Hollywood superstar sat quietly in one of the booths near the window. He looked different from how people usually saw him on screen. There were no flashy sunglasses or entourage following him around. Instead, he wore a plain black hoodie pulled low over his head, blending seamlessly into the background. His face was partially hidden as he leaned forward slightly, scrolling through his phone while sipping on a cup of black coffee. To anyone watching, he appeared to be just another tired traveler taking a break from the world outside. But if someone had taken a closer look, they might have recognized him immediately. After all, Vin Diesel wasn't exactly hard to spot once you knew what to look for. Vin hadn't chosen this diner randomly. He liked places like this, small, unassuming spots that reminded him of simpler times before fame found him. Back when life wasn't about red carpets and movie premieres, but rather about surviving and finding joy in the little things. Sitting here, surrounded by the comforting chaos of a bustling kitchen and the soft murmur of strangers sharing stories, gave him a sense of peace he rarely experienced anymore. For a brief moment, he could pretend he was just an ordinary guy enjoying a quiet meal. As Vin scrolled absent-mindedly through his phone, a young waitress approached his table. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her dark hair tied, back neatly in a ponytail, and her name tag read Lila. She carried herself with a quiet confidence despite the weariness in her eyes, a sign that she'd probably been working long hours to make ends meet. Her smile was warm and genuine as she greeted him. "Hi there," she said cheerfully, her voice cutting through the low din of the diner. "Can I get you anything else?" Vin glanced up at her, returning her smile with one of his own. "No, thank you," he replied politely. "Just the check when you're ready." Lila nodded and jotted something down on her notepad before turning to leave. As she did, however, Vin noticed something unusual about her. There was a sadness lurking beneath her cheerful exterior, though she tried hard to hide it. It wasn't obvious, not the kind of thing most people would pick up on. But Vin had spent enough years observing human behavior both on and off screen to recognize it. Something about her demeanor tugged at his heartstrings, making him curious. He watched as she moved gracefully between tables, refilling coffee cups and exchanging pleasantries with other customers. Despite her obvious fatigue, she never seemed to lose patience or kindness. Every interaction was marked by a sincerity that stood out even in such a welcoming environment. Vin found himself wondering what her story might be, what struggles lay behind those tired eyes, what dreams kept her going day after day. When Lila returned a few minutes later with his bill, Vin handed her his credit card without hesitation. But instead of simply handing it over, he paused for a moment, pulling out his wallet. It was an old leather wallet, worn from years of use, and inside were several pictures tucked neatly into its folds. These weren't just random snapshots. They were mementos of the people and moments that mattered most to him. One photo in particular caught Lila's attention almost immediately. "That's your mom?" she asked softly, pointing to a picture of a woman smiling warmly, surrounded by children. Her tone was casual, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her voice. Vin nodded, his expression softening as he looked at the image. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She passed away years ago, but she was my hero, you know. Still is." Something about the way he spoke struck a chord deep within Lila. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the wallet from him to process the payment. When she glanced back down at the photo, her breath hitched in her throat. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, a resemblance too striking to ignore. But as she stared harder, realization dawned on her, and tears began welling up in her eyes. Without warning, she gasped audibly and dropped the wallet onto the counter. "What's wrong?" Vin asked, concern etched across his face. He leaned forward slightly, trying to understand why Lila suddenly looked so shaken. Lila didn't respond right away. She stood frozen, staring at the photograph as if seeing a ghost. Finally, she managed to choke out a single sentence, her voice trembling. "With emotion, that's my mom." Vin's eyes widened in disbelief as Lila's words hung in the air between them. For a moment, neither of them moved or spoke. The diner's usual background noise, the clinking of cutlery, the faint murmur of conversations, seemed to fade into the distance, leaving only the weight of what had just been said. Vin blinked once, then twice, trying to process the impossible coincidence unfolding before him. "Your mom," he repeated slowly, his voice tinged with both confusion and curiosity. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, as he studied Lila's face more closely. There was no mistaking the sincerity in her expression. Her wide, tear-filled eyes told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't joking, nor was she mistaken. This revelation had hit her like a tidal wave, and it showed in every line of her body language. Lila nodded, her hands trembling as she reached out to pick up the wallet from where it had fallen. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible, over the soft hum of the diner. "That's Angela, my mom." Her fingers brushed against the photograph, tracing its edges as if trying to confirm its reality. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't bother wiping them away. Instead, she continued speaking, her words tumbling out in a rush as though she couldn't contain them any longer. "She disappeared 10 years ago," Lila explained, her voice cracking under the weight of memories she'd tried so hard to bury. One day she was there, and the next, she was gone. No note, no explanation, nothing. I was 12 years old, and suddenly I didn't have a mother anymore. Her shoulders sagged as if the burden of those years had finally caught up with her. We looked everywhere for her, called everyone we knew, but no one could tell us anything. It was like she vanished into thin air. Hearing this, Vin felt a pang of guilt twist in his chest. He had always known Angela as a kind, selfless woman, who had taken him under her wing during some of the darkest days of his life. She had given him stability when he had none, offering guidance and love without expecting anything in return. But never once had she mentioned having another child, a daughter who might still be waiting for her somewhere. "I had no idea," Vin admitted quietly, his brow furrowing as he tried to reconcile the two halves of Angela's story. "She never told me about you." Lila let out a shaky breath, her gaze dropping to the floor as she processed his response. "Why would she?" she asked bitterly, though there was no real anger in her tone, just raw, unfiltered pain. "Why would she show up in your life and completely abandon ours? How could she do that?" The questions spilled out uncontrollably, each one layered, with years of unanswered longing and frustration. Vin hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He wanted to offer comfort, to reassure her that Angela must have had a good reason for leaving, but the truth was, he didn't know the full story either. All he could do was share what he did know, and hope it brought some clarity to the situation. "Angela saved me," Vin began, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. "When I met her, I was lost. I didn't have much going for me back then. No family, no direction, nothing. I was living on the streets doing whatever I could to survive. And then somehow she found me. She took me in, gave me a place to stay, and treated me like I was her own son. She believed in me when no one else did. And because of her, I became the person I am today." As he spoke, Vin's eyes softened, reflecting the deep gratitude he still carried for the woman who had changed his life. "But even though she helped me turn things around, I always sensed that she carried a lot of pain with her. She never talked about her past, at least not with me. But I could see it in her eyes sometimes, like there was something heavy weighing on her heart that she couldn't let go of. Lila listened intently, her tears slowing as she absorbed his words. Despite the ache in her chest, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of understanding. Maybe Angela hadn't chosen to leave her behind willingly. Maybe there was more to the story than she had ever allowed herself to consider. "You really think she cared about you that much?" Lila asked hesitantly, her voice trembling with vulnerability. "Enough to take care of someone else when she couldn't even take care of me?" Vin nodded firmly, his expression unwavering. "Absolutely. Angela had a way of making people feel seen and valued, no matter who they were or where they came from. She saw potential in me when I couldn't see it myself, and she poured everything she had into helping me succeed. Trust me, if she had the means to support both of us, she would have done it in a heartbeat. Whatever kept her away from you, it wasn't because she didn't love you." The conviction in his voice struck a chord within Lila, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to entertain the possibility that her mother's absence might not have been a rejection after all. Perhaps Angela had been fighting battles of her own, battles that prevented her from being the mother Lila deserved. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy, yet strangely comforting. Finally, Lila broke it with a hesitant question. Do you think there's a way to find out what happened to her? Why she left, and why she ended up with you instead of coming back to us?" Vin considered this for a moment, his mind racing with possibilities. He had kept mementos from his time with Angela, letters, photographs, little keepsakes that reminded him of the impact she'd had on his life. If anyone could piece together the missing parts of her story, it might be him. And now that he knew Lila existed, he owed it to both of them to try. "I think we can figure it out," Vin said finally, his tone resolute. "Together." Lila looked at him, surprise and hope mingling in her tear-streaked face. For so long she had carried the weight of her mother's disappearance alone, convinced that no one else understood or cared about the void it had left in her life. But here was someone who not only shared her connection to Angela, but was also willing to help her uncover the truth. "Thank you," she murmured softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Vin replied gently, offering her a reassuring smile. "We're in this together now." And with that simple promise, a bond began to form between them, one forged by shared grief, mutual admiration for the same extraordinary woman, and the determination to honor her memory by finding answers. As they sat there in the quiet diner, surrounded by strangers oblivious to the profound moment unfolding before them, Lila and Vin took the first step toward healing wounds that had festered for far too long. Back at his hotel room later that night, Vin couldn't shake the image of Lila's tear-streaked face from his mind. The encounter at the diner had stirred up emotions he hadn't felt in years. Memories of Angela, yes, but also a deep sense of responsibility. He realized now that while Angela had played an enormous role in shaping his life, she must have carried burdens far greater than he'd ever imagined. And somewhere along the way, those burdens had cost her dearly, not just with Lila, but perhaps with herself as well. Determined to uncover the truth, Vin began rifling through the old suitcase tucked away in the corner of his closet. It was filled with mementos from his early days, faded concert tickets, dog-eared books, and a small wooden box that held some of Angela's most cherished belongings. As he opened the box, memories flooded back like a tide he couldn't hold. Back. There were photographs of Angela smiling brightly, letters written in her neat looping handwriting, and even a few trinkets she'd given him over the years, a keychain here, a bookmark there. But among these treasures lay something he hadn't looked at in ages: Angela's journal. The journal was worn and slightly yellowed with time, its leather cover cracked at the edges. Vin hesitated before opening it, unsure if he had the right to delve into such personal thoughts. But then he remembered Lila's pleading eyes and the hope flickering within her. If this journal could provide answers, If it could help them understand why Angela had left her family behind, then it was worth exploring. He called Lila immediately, explaining what he'd found and inviting her to meet him at the hotel. She agreed without hesitation, arriving within the hour clutching a cup of coffee for herself and one for Vin. Her nervous energy was palpable as she sat across from him on the edge of the bed, watching intently as he carefully opened the journal. The first entry dated back nearly 2 decades. In it, Angela described the day she met Vin, a scrappy teenager struggling to survive on the streets of Los Angeles. "His name is Mark Sinclair," she wrote, using Vin's birth name. "I saw him sitting alone outside the shelter today, looking so lost. I don't know why, but my heart aches for him. Maybe God brought him into my path for a reason." Lila listened silently as Vin read aloud, her expression shifting between disbelief and awe. For the first time, she was seeing her mother not just as a parent who had walked out on her, but as a compassionate woman driven by an overwhelming desire to help others. Each word painted a picture of someone who poured every ounce of herself into making the world around her a little brighter, even when doing so came at great personal cost. As they flipped through the pages, they discovered more about Angela's struggles. One entry revealed how she had lost custody of Lila after falling on hard times financially. "I failed her," Angela confessed in shaky handwriting. "I couldn't give her the life she deserved, and now they've taken her away from me. How am I supposed to live with that?" Lila's breath hitched as Vin paused to let the weight of those words sink in. She had always assumed her mother had abandoned her willingly, but reading this made her realize how wrong she'd been. Angela hadn't left because she didn't care. She'd left because she thought she wasn't good enough. The realization hit Lila like a freight train, forcing her to confront years of misplaced anger and resentment. Further entries detailed Angela's move to Los Angeles, where she hoped to start fresh. "Maybe if I can build a better life for myself, I'll be able to reconnect with my daughter someday," she wrote. "But until then, I need to focus on surviving." These lines offered insight into the sacrifices Angela had made, including taking odd jobs and living paycheck to paycheck just to keep a roof over her head. Eventually, she crossed paths with Vin, pouring all her remaining strength into helping him turn his life around. "She gave everything she had to you," Lila murmured, her voice trembling, "even when she barely had anything left for herself." Vin nodded solemnly, guilt gnawing at his insides. "I never knew she was carrying this kind of pain," he admitted. "If I had known—" His voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. What could he have done differently? Could he have helped Angela mend the broken pieces of her own life while she was busy fixing his? They continued reading together, their shared grief transforming into a quiet determination. By the time they reached the final pages of the journal, tears were streaming down both their faces. Angela's last entry was particularly heartbreaking. "I want to reach out to Lila so badly," she wrote. "But what if she hates me? What if she doesn't forgive me for leaving? I'm too scared to try. Instead, I'll hold on to the hope that someday, somehow she'll know how much I love her." Those words hung heavily in the air, echoing long after Vin finished reading them aloud. Lila clutched the journal tightly, her knuckles white against the worn leather. For years, she had carried the burden of believing her mother hadn't cared enough to come back. Now she understood that Angela's silence stemmed not from indifference but from fear, and maybe even shame. "I never hated her," Lila whispered finally, breaking the silence. "Not really. I just didn't understand. All this time I thought she left because she didn't love me. But now I see that she loved me too much to risk facing my rejection." Vin placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, offering her a small, sad smile. "Angela was one of the strongest people I've ever known," he said softly. "But even the strongest people break sometimes. She did the best she could with what she had, and I think that's something we should honor." Lila nodded, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her sweater. Though the ache of losing her mother would never fully disappear, she felt a strange sense of peace settling over her, For the first time in years, she wasn't angry anymore. Instead, she felt gratitude for Angela's sacrifices, for the chance to learn about her through Vin, and for the unexpected connection they'd formed tonight. Together, they decided to piece together Angela's story further, vowing to honor her memory in a meaningful way. Whether it meant sharing her journey with others, or simply keeping her legacy alive in their hearts, they knew they owed it to her to try. As dawn broke outside the hotel window, casting golden light across the room, Vin and Lila sat side by side, united by their shared love for a woman who had touched both their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Vin and Lila sat together in his hotel room, surrounded by Angela's belongings spread out across the bed. The journal lay open at the center, its pages whispering secrets from the past that neither of them had been ready to hear until now. They had spent hours poring over its contents, piecing together fragments of Angela's life like detectives solving a mystery. But as dawn gave way to morning, they realized there was still so much left unanswered. The journal revealed Angela's struggles, her financial hardships, her heartbreak over losing custody of Lila, and her determination to rebuild her life in Los Angeles. Yet it also raised new questions. Why had she never reached out to Lila after moving away? What stopped her from trying to reconnect, even if only through letters or phone calls? And most importantly, how could they honor her memory while addressing the pain she'd unintentionally caused? Vin leaned back against the headboard, rubbing his temples as he processed everything they'd learned. "She loved you," he said, finally breaking the silence. "That much is clear. But I think fear got in the way. Fear of rejection. Maybe even shame for not being able to give you the life she wanted." Lila nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edges of one of Angela's old photographs. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but there was a newfound clarity in her expression. For years she had blamed herself for her mother's disappearance, convinced that something she had done, or failed to do, had driven Angela away. Now armed with the truth, she understood that her mother's absence wasn't about her at all. It was about Angela's own insecurities and the impossible choices she'd faced. "But why didn't she tell you about me?" Lila asked suddenly, her voice tinged with both curiosity and frustration. "If she cared about me so much, shouldn't she have mentioned me to you? You were her son, sort of, in every way that mattered. Didn't you deserve to know?" Vin sighed deeply, running a hand over his stubbled jaw. He had been wondering the same thing himself. "I think she might have kept us separate because she felt guilty," he admitted. "Maybe she thought bringing up your name would remind her too much of what she'd lost and make her feel like she wasn't doing enough for either of us. Or maybe—" His voice trailed off, uncertainty creeping into his tone. "Maybe she thought keeping us apart was better than risking disappointment." Lila frowned, absorbing his words. It made sense, in a way. Angela had always struck him as someone who put others' needs before her own, even when it meant sacrificing her own happiness. Perhaps she believed that focusing on helping Vin would allow her to atone for failing Lila, however misguided that reasoning might have been. As they continued to discuss Angela's motivations, a deeper understanding began to take shape between them. They weren't just strangers connected by a shared loss anymore. They were two people bound by the same remarkable woman who had shaped their lives in profoundly different ways. Slowly but surely, the anger and confusion that had defined Lila's relationship with her mother started to give way to empathy and forgiveness. "I don't think I'll ever stop missing her," Lila confessed softly, staring down at the photograph in her hands. "But I think I can forgive her now, not because she deserves it, because I need to. Holding on to all that anger hasn't changed anything. If anything, it's just made me miserable." Vin smiled faintly, touched by her honesty. "Forgiveness is hard," he agreed, "especially when the person you're forgiving isn't here to apologize. But I think Angela would be proud of you for finding the strength to let go of that anger." She always believed in second chances for everyone, including herself. Encouraged by this breakthrough, they decided to take their search for answers a step further. Together, they compiled a list of people who might have known Angela during her time in Los Angeles. There were old co-workers, neighbors, and friends, mentioned briefly in the journal, all potential leads that could help fill in the gaps of her story. Vin offered to reach out to them, using his resources and connections to track them down. Meanwhile, Lila volunteered to dig through her own family archives, hoping to find any mementos or documents that might shed additional light on Angela's life before she disappeared. Over the next few days, their efforts began to bear fruit. One of Angela's former co-workers, a kind elderly woman named Ruth, remembered her fondly. Angela was such a sweetheart, Ruth recalled during a phone call with Vin, always looking out for others, even when she barely had 2 pennies to rub together. I remember she used to talk about her daughter sometimes, how much she missed her and wished things could have turned out differently. Hearing this brought fresh tears to Lila's eyes when Vin relayed the conversation to her. It was bittersweet, confirmation that Angela had carried her love for Lila close to her heart, even in her final years. Another lead came from an old neighbor who remembered seeing Angela write letters late into the night, though she never sent them. She said she was afraid of causing more pain, the neighbor explained. Afraid her daughter wouldn't want to hear from her after all this time. Each new detail painted a fuller picture of Angela, not just as a mother or mentor, but as a complex human being wrestling with guilt, regret, and an overwhelming desire to do right by the people she loved. Through these conversations, Vin and Lila came to appreciate the depth of her sacrifices and the toll they had taken on her spirit. As they worked side by side, their bond deepened. Lila found comfort in Vin's steady presence, his unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth about Angela. In turn, Vin admired Lila's resilience, her ability to confront painful memories without letting bitterness consume her. Together, they created a safe space where they could grieve, reflect, and ultimately celebrate the woman who had brought them together. By the end of the week, they had gathered enough information to piece together a coherent narrative of Angela's life. They knew she hadn't abandoned Lila out of malice or neglect, but rather out of fear and self-doubt. They knew she had poured every ounce of her energy into helping Vin succeed, believing that by doing so, she could somehow redeem herself for the mistakes of her past. And they knew that despite her flaws and failures, she had loved them both fiercely. Sitting together one evening, surrounded by scraps of paper and faded photographs, Vin looked at Lila and smiled. "We may not have all the answers," he said gently, "but I think we've found something just as important. Closure. For both of us." Lila returned his smile, feeling lighter than she had in years. Though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, she knew she wasn't walking it alone anymore. With Vin by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and to honor Angela's memory in a way that truly reflected the love and strength she had shown them both. With their newfound understanding of Angela's life, Vin and Lila decided it was time to turn their focus outward. They wanted to honor her memory in a way that would not only keep her legacy alive, but also help others facing similar struggles. After all, Angela had spent her life giving everything she had to support those around her, whether it was raising Lila, mentoring Vin, or working tirelessly to make ends meet. It felt only right to channel her spirit of generosity into something meaningful. One evening, as they sat together in Vin's hotel room, surrounded by the mementos and notes they had collected, Lila spoke up. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "Mom always believed in helping people who didn't have much. She used to say that even small acts of kindness could change someone's life." Vin nodded, leaning forward slightly. "I remember that. About her too," he replied. "She was always looking for ways to lift others up, no matter how tough things got for her." Lila paused for a moment, her eyes lighting up with an idea. "What if we did something to help people like her? Single moms who are struggling to get back on their feet. Women who need a little extra support to chase their dreams." The suggestion hung in the air between them, sparking a sense of purpose neither of them had felt before. Vin smiled, his expression softening. "That's a great idea," he said. "Something practical, something lasting, something Mom would be proud of." Over the next few days, they brainstormed ideas and sketched out plans. Eventually, they settled on creating a scholarship fund specifically designed to assist single mothers pursuing education or career training. The goal was simple: provide financial aid, resources, and mentorship to women determined to build better lives for themselves and their families. They named it the Angela Legacy Fund, a tribute to the woman whose love and sacrifices had inspired them both. But setting up a scholarship wasn't going to be easy. Neither Vin nor Lila had experience organizing such a large-scale project, and they quickly realized they'd need help. Fortunately, Vin's status as a Hollywood icon opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. He reached out to his network of friends, colleagues, and philanthropists, explaining the mission behind the fund and asking for their support. To his delight, many were eager to contribute, not just financially, but also by volunteering their time and expertise. Meanwhile, Lila threw herself into researching existing programs for single mothers, learning what worked and what didn't. She reached out to local community organizations, universities, and nonprofits, gathering insights and advice from experts in the field. Her dedication impressed everyone she spoke to, including Vin, who watched her transform from a grieving daughter into a driven advocate for change. As word spread about the Angela Legacy Fund, interest grew rapidly. Donations began pouring in, from fans who admired Vin's work, from strangers touched by Angela's story, and even from celebrities eager to lend their names to the cause. Social media played a huge role in amplifying their efforts, with Vin posting heartfelt messages about Angela and the fund's mission. Each post garnered thousands of likes, shares, and comments, flooding their inbox with messages of encouragement and gratitude. One particularly moving message came from a young mother named Sarah, who shared her own struggles balancing parenthood with her dream of becoming a nurse. "I've been trying to go back to school for years," she wrote, "but every time I think I'm ready, something comes up. Medical bills, daycare costs, you name it. Reading about your mom made me realize I'm not alone, and knowing there's a fund like this gives me hope. Thank you for doing this." Reading Sarah's words brought tears to Lila's eyes. For so long, she had carried the weight of her mother's absence, feeling as though Angela's sacrifices had gone unnoticed. Now, through the fund, she saw firsthand how those sacrifices could inspire others to keep pushing forward, no matter how hard life became. To ensure the fund had a lasting impact, Finn and Lila worked closely with legal advisors and financial planners to establish it as a nonprofit organization. They set up a board of directors, composed of trusted friends and professionals, to oversee its operations and ensure transparency. They also created a website where applicants could submit their stories and apply for assistance, along with a portal for donors to track the fund's progress. The launch event took place several months later at a community center in Los Angeles. It was a modest affair, attended by close friends, family members, and representatives from partner organizations. Vin gave a short speech, his voice trembling with emotion as he spoke about Angela's influence on his life. "She taught me the value of second chances," he said, addressing the crowd. "And she showed me that no matter how broken you feel, you can still find a way to help others. That's what this fund is about. Not just remembering her, but carrying her spirit forward." When it was Lila's turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, visibly nervous but determined. "My mom wasn't perfect," she admitted, glancing down at the photo of Angela she held in her hand. "But she loved deeply, and she fought hard, even when the odds were stacked against her. This fund is our way of saying thank you to her and to all the moms out there who wake up every day ready to fight for their kids. We see you, and we're here to help." The audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears as they stood to show their support. By the end of the night, the Angela Legacy Fund had raised over $500,000, far exceeding their initial goal. More importantly, it had sparked a movement, a ripple effect of kindness and empowerment that extended far beyond anything Vin or Lila could have imagined. In the weeks that followed, applications began rolling in from women across the country. Some were students hoping to finish college degrees. Others were entrepreneurs seeking funding to start small businesses. Each application told a unique story, yet all shared a common thread: resilience in the face of adversity, and a fierce determination to create a brighter future for themselves and their children. Working together to review these applications brought Vin and Lila even closer. They spent hours discussing each candidate, weighing their needs and potential impact. Though it was impossible to approve everyone, they made sure to send personalized responses to each applicant, thanking them for sharing their stories and offering words of encouragement whenever possible. Through it all, Lila found herself growing more confident, not just in her ability to lead, but in her capacity to heal. Helping others reminded her of the lessons Angela had tried to teach her. That strength isn't about never falling, but about finding the courage to stand back up again. And knowing that Vin believed in her made the journey feel less daunting. One afternoon, as they wrapped up another long day of reviewing applications, Vin turned to Lila with a proud smile. "You know," he said, "your mom would be so proud of you. Not just for starting this fund, but for everything you've done since we met. You've taken something painful and turned it into something beautiful." Lila blushed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she replied honestly. "You've been there for me every step of the way, and I'll never forget that." Vin chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Hey, teamwork makes the dream work, right?" They laughed together, the sound filling the room with warmth and light. For the first time in years, both of them felt truly at peace. Though Angela was no longer physically present, her love continued to guide them, shaping their actions and inspiring them to make a difference in the world. Through the Angela Legacy Fund, they had found a way to honor her memory, not just as a mother or mentor, but as a beacon of hope for anyone striving to overcome life's challenges.